I have created a new sound here that may impact the recording. I have a balcony where I want to, dry the clothes. I have a clothes hanger, a rack, and it's monsoon season, so I put a little plastic sheet to protect the clothes from the monsoon. But now that plastic sheet makes this flapping sound, which may creep into the recording, so I'll see how bad that is. This is climate adaptation in real time, and what unanticipated problems end up causing, barriers to adaptation, as we say. So let's look at some specific aspects of what the adaptation strategies could be for countries that are vulnerable to droughts, and this includes many countries in the global south and also rich countries like parts of Europe and especially western US, the breadbasket of the plain states, Great Plains also has had drought issues and so on. And of course we have to worry about sub-Saharan Africa all the time. Let's read it off. Adaptation strategies for countries vulnerable to droughts. Despite remarkable progress in avoiding the worst outcomes, recent droughts in Central Asia, Africa, and South America still threatened the lives of millions. Droughts have long-lasting adverse economic effects and contribute to food insecurity, mass migration, conflict, and fragility, and other socioeconomic concerns. As climate change intensifies, so will the intensity and frequency of droughts. So there is this concept of flash droughts now, where partially due to global warming, the droughts can grow very fast, and unlike just like flash floods, we have the terminology flash droughts now as well. Of course, with droughts you have to worry about whether it's a meteorological drought, just a deficit in rainfall, or it's an agricultural drought, ecological drought, hydrological drought, and so on. We'll just use a generic term drought here. In sub-Saharan Africa, as we already mentioned, the place of concern, each drought reduces medium-term annual growth by 1 percentage point. Each drought reduces medium-term annual growth by 1 percentage point. They are really, really vulnerable to droughts. This is about 8 times that in the rest of the world's emerging market and developing economies. There had been a long debate about whether the droughts in sub-Saharan Africa was due to overgrazing by the herders and so on. And it turned out that actually the warming over the Atlantic, which is mainly due to greenhouse gas emissions from the rich countries, causes long-lasting droughts over sub-Saharan Africa. So you know how poor people get hammered. Okay. Low-income households are most severely affected as their coping mechanisms are limited and they often depend on rain-fed agriculture. While there are many channels through which this impacts growth. A striking one is marked increase in school dropouts and deterioration of infant health. So droughts happen, annual growth rate drops, but then there are these effects of impacts on growth, also affecting school dropouts and deterioration of infant health, which is often related to labor, family income, food availability, unemployment, etc. Recent IMF research shows that the following key adaptation policy areas, when adequately integrated into near and medium-term budgets, could impactfully reduce vulnerability to droughts and support sustainable and inclusive growth. So IMF playing its good role over there. First, raise agricultural productivity and reduce its sensitivity to inclement weather. This calls for a multi-pronged approach spanning improvements in mobile networks, irrigation, erosion protection, and seed quality. Some are fast time scale implementation possibilities, some are longer term implementations. For example, in Ghana, cocoa's drought resistance was bolstered with improved seed varieties, planting non-cocoa trees for shade, and improving irrigation systems. Whether these improved seed varieties are freely available or whether they get trapped into some other agreement with the industry companies and so on has to be watched out for as well. In Ethiopia, some farmers' yields rose by up to 40% with the development of wheat varieties resistant to rust, which is a fungal disease. Better mobile phone networks mean better access to early warning systems and weather information, which is one of the most effective adaptation tools for many countries, especially for poor countries. So these can be even in the form of simple voice messages that enable more productive and climate smart agriculture. So decisions are made that can help. I have separate podcasts and a whole course on how to use subseasonal to seasonal forecasts to develop early warning systems with multiple time scales we call ready, set, go frameworks that you can look up. Overall, raising farmers' awareness would also accelerate implementation of these measures. So the so-called last mile gap has to be closed. Early warning systems cannot simply be sent as SMSs or put on websites hoping they will be used or that they are useful because they are put out. So this training to use the early warnings to make decisions are needed often, and that requires transboundary or extension agents from meteorology to sectoral applications, food, water, energy, and health, and so on. Secondly, invest in diversified energy sources. Electricity is critical for agriculture as it powers irrigation systems and deep tube well pumps, but 1/5 of sub-Saharan Africa's electricity is generated from hydropower, which is susceptible to droughts themselves. Diversifying green electricity sources over long term will not only increase electrification but also reduce carbon emissions and create new jobs, right? In Kenya, access to electricity rose from 40% to 70% of the population, in large part through small off-grid solar-powered energy plants. The pay-as-you-go mobile money model may also have some advantage in terms of accessibility and scalability. So these are economic principles that are more clearly being mentioned in terms of adaptation in drought-vulnerable countries. Thirdly, strengthen coping mechanisms. Following a drought, higher incomes from diversified sources and access to finance and social assistance, among others, act as buffers that help people and businesses cope. Policies can support diversifying income sources and improving access to finance. In particular, social protection programs such as health and unemployment insurance can be adapted to cover impacts resulting from droughts and other climate shocks. You think of floods as bringing waterborne diseases, for example, which is true, but even droughts can bring diseases, often in unexpected ways, because often during droughts rodents may invade granaries in the house and bring plague, etc. And people congregate to remaining small water bodies where there are snails, schistosomiasis, and use of dirty water because there is availability issues, and so on. So health is always something to watch out for, both in floods and in droughts. Okay. So governments should be careful about setting goals without okay, that was something we already read for the last one. Moving on, in what cases is government intervention warranted? So if you want to make adaptation part of the development process and fiscal policies, then you need to figure out when government intervention, which means government expenditure, hence fiscal policies, are warranted. Investments in adaptation are similar to other investments that firms, individuals, and governments make to maximize profits or utility. It is then possible to apply standard economic analysis to study adaptation to climate change, which is the goal of this staff note that we are summarizing. In perfectly competitive markets, complete structure of property rights, atomistic participants, complete information, and no transaction costs, so no hidden costs, especially for the poor. Individuals and firms are expected to adapt efficiently in such perfectly competitive markets. Are they really hypothetical, or do they really exist? They are purely hypothetical by construct, but they provide useful benchmarks to develop a theory of government intervention for adaptation policies as well as other government policies. In imperfectly competitive markets, on the other hand, adaptation is inefficient and governments should intervene, mirroring standard prescriptions for public policy from economic theory. So let's read off these. There are a lot of these, so maybe I should come back and do this. So let's do the cases for government intervention in the next podcast, even though we started it here. Okay, so this one is already 10 minutes long, so it's long enough, and we'll come back and continue. Okay.